As part of the proposed $418 million settlement to the NAR lawsuit, there's going to be a few changes for both buyers and sellers in the Tennessee Valley. But before we jump into that, make sure you hit subscribe below to stay on top of all of the latest Huntsville, Alabama real estate news. So you might be asking about when all these changes that we're going to be talking about are going to go into effect. Well, across the nation, it's going to be August 17th. That is when all the real estate MLSs, all the realtor-owned MLSs have to make this change. Even though these changes, this proposed settlement has not been officially finalized, that's not even looking like that's going to happen until the end of this year or early next year. And so it's even possible that some of the changes that we're talking about today could possibly change over the coming months and into 2025. So the changes are going to be effective August 17th across the US. However, our local board has decided to make these changes effective August 1st. So all the changes that we are talking about are now effective and live, and Matt Curtis Real Estate has incorporated all these changes out there for both our buyers and sellers. And so when you call Matt Curtis Real Estate, we will be prepared to address these changes with you. So one of the main changes with the new settlement is that buyer agreements now have to be in place prior to viewing a home. And that's even for anybody that's old enough to purchase a home. It could even be parents or brothers or sisters or whatever going to view the home. They need to be on that buyer agreement as well. That's the negative side of it. I think the positive side of it is that I think there's going to be more buyer consultations that take place in terms of educating buyers on what the process looks like, what the estimated funds are going to be needed to close, and just more education for buyers and really about strategies and those type of things. And so I think it is good for both agents and buyers to slow down early in the process. The challenge is going to be really for those, what we kind of call like Pop-Tart type showings in the industry, where somebody wants to go look at a home real quick and they haven't really thought about the process yet, and agents is just meeting them out at the home. And so in those type of situations, you still need a buyer agreement in place. But if you don't really know the agent that you've called and you're just starting to get to know them, and you don't know if you want to commit to a full out exclusive buyer agency agreement for the entire length of the process, you can look at shortening that period or even specifying to a particular home or homes that you're viewing with that particular agent until you really feel comfortable with them and you know that that's the agent that you're going to work with to ultimately purchase the home. Now, a second major change is that buyer agency commission is no longer advertised in the MLS. Prior to these changes, what would happen is a listing agent would go meet with the seller and they would get a commission of X, and then oftentimes they would agree to share that commission, sometimes X divided by 2, with the buyer broker that actually brings the buyer that consummates in the sale for that property. So that's how it would work in the past. And then buyers would not have to worry about out-of-pocket expenses because the seller was paying for it, and really the buyer was paying for it through the purchase of the home. And so that's the way things were done. Now, buyer agency commissions no longer advertised in the MLS. Some brokers are still going to be out there working with their sellers to offer buyer broker compensation. And they're going to look to advertise that in other places, such as websites, potentially phone calls. There's other different websites and different things that are popping up for agents to share that information. I don't believe that's what the DOJ, the Department of Justice, intended with this rule change. So Matt Curtis Real Estate is no longer going to be doing broker-to-broker commission sharing. There is going to be something called seller concessions, where the seller is still willing to pay a buyer broker just like they're willing to pay buyer closing costs to help that buyer to be able to afford their home. And so that is definitely something that's still going to exist. I just don't think there should be broker-to-broker commission sharing if you look at the actual DOJ rules and what they're actually trying to get across with these rules. And so Matt Curtis Real Estate is going to keep the commission separate, and the seller is likely to still going to paying a lot of buyer broker commission, but that's going to be negotiated in the contract prior, as opposed to being advertised on a different website or fielding various phone calls and different things like that. So a lot of our sellers may consider doing seller concessions, but it won't be directly buyer broker commissions. So if you're a buyer working with a buyer agent, what does this process look like? Well, you're going to sit down with your buyer agent, maybe on the hood of a car right outside the home, or preferably in an office or a coffee shop or that sort of thing, going over a buyer agreement and doing a buyer consultation, walking through the process. So you're going to agree upon that fee up front with your buyer agent. And a lot of buyer agents and buyers are going to look to negotiate that fee into the contract. Some sellers, like we just said, may already be offering buyer commissions. I don't think that's the right way to do it. I think they should be offering seller concessions. Those seller concessions can go towards anything that the buyer wants to. It's kind of what we've had already. Many buyers, to be able to purchase a home, they need either closing cost, or in this environment, maybe rate buy downs to be able to afford the homes. That's what a lot of builders are doing right now. So it's just another thing that some buyers are going to need to be able to purchase that home. It could be go towards closing costs, rate buy downs, or even buyer agency commissions. So a lot of sellers are going to be offering this, but either way, at Matt Curtis Real Estate, we're going to attempt to negotiate that into the contract for the seller to pay for, so to help minimize some of the expenses that a lot of buyers have for buyer agent commission. All right, so we've talked a lot about what changes are going to occur for buyers and kind of indirectly for sellers as well. So let's lay it out for the sellers. Number one is we're going to be updating paperwork for sellers, which is going to now include just the listing fee. So as opposed to that fee that would cover both a buyer and a seller commission, the paperwork's now going to be covering the listing company. Some brokerages will do buyer agent commission sharing rates. However, I think this is the wrong approach, and I think some of these brokerages may find themselves in trouble with the Department of Justice or additional lawsuits if they continue down that road. So what a lot of companies are going to be doing, including ours, is seller concessions. So sellers that are willing to offer concessions to buyers, they can go ahead and plan for that on the front end, where they are offering concessions towards that buyer to pay for whatever they want to, whether it be buyer brokerage compensation or rate buy downs or closing costs, or really a package of all those things all together. Buyer broker compensation is also going to be through the contract as well. It's not going to be something that's in the listing agreement and then advertised in the MLS. Buyer broker compensation is going to be needed in the additional provisions and spelled out there for whatever your buyer broker is going to be compensated. And then for, of course, we're talking about sellers. So that's where sellers, you're going to be looking at what additional expenses are going to be needed to be accounted for with the sale of your home. So you're going to have sales price and then any additional provision sections as well. Talk about seller concessions for buyer broker compensation or buyer closing costs. So I've seen some different articles out there saying that they're hoping that this is going to help be a solution to the affordability crisis. And unfortunately, this is not going to fix the affordability crisis, and here's why. So even in an extreme case, let's say commissions came down 1 to 3%, which I think that is a very extreme case. If the event that happened, that's still not going to affect or really move the needle on the affordability crisis that we have, because over the last few years, we had 40% of the US dollars printed during that 24-month time frame of the pandemic. And so we've had a 40+% increase in terms of prices. And so 1 to 3% off of that 40% is really not going to get us where we need to be in this country. The big challenge that we have is government spending, deficit spending, the Fed printing money. This is not going to fix that challenge, but what do politicians do? They don't ever accept responsibility for the actions that they've created. They always try to point fingers at others to try to get other solutions out there to fix their challenges. Like, we could talk about rent control, we could talk about commission here that would make a difference. But really the challenge with affordability is higher borrowing costs with interest rates, which is a direct effect of the Fed, and then also just deficit spending and all the inflation money printing that we've had across the US. So, in best case scenario, some sellers could benefit from lower buyer agency fees, which means the sellers would actually be the ones benefiting from this change that's gone into effect. But most buyers, they're not going to likely come out any better, because home prices, home values are not likely to dip because of this. And so best case scenario, buyers get their full commission paid for through the contract. And I think that's going to likely happen a lot. In the event that they don't, they're going to have to make up that difference in terms of higher fees. So I think this is a potentially neutral situation for buyers, but could be a lose situation for buyers. And then sellers could benefit, but I think it's going to be kind of a neutral effect for a lot of sellers as well. So if all these new changes sound complicated, that's why we're the #1 real estate team in Alabama. We are on top of all these changes for you. Call the #1 team in Alabama for the past 5 years to help walk you through these buyer changes and also these seller changes to help you either maximize the value of your home or help navigate the purchase of your home so that you're not having to pay extra out-of-pocket fees that you weren't anticipating.